Tonight,
No, it's
the
not
Code
now.
Update Committee's Phase 5. And what we'll be doing is going through a little bit of the history, identification of the topics that existed from NYSERDA that need to be covered in the Code Update Committee's work, a review of all of the chapters in the current village's code, identification of which chapters are not going to be recommended, any modifications to them, and then a summary of each of the chapters and the changes that are being recommended, a summary of them. The total number of pages that are being modified recommended to be modified by the Code Update Committee, number 500 pages of text. And so you're not going to get a copy of the 500 pages of text tonight. However, all of the changes are online on the village's website. Go to the Code Update Committee, go to Phase 5, and you'll see two folders there. One folder shows you the changes with red line edits, and the other folder shows you the changes with those edits accepted. So all of the changes that are being recommended are online. Tonight's meeting will be held open for 30 days to give you and any other interested parties adequate time to review the materials on the website and send your comments. And the presentation will identify how to send in your comments. Okay. Can I ask you a
Sure.
question?
When you tell me.
Thank you. So a little bit about the Code Update Committee. Backing up, there was the Special Board for a Comprehensive Plan Local Waterfront Revitalization Strategy was formed by the village, and that committee recommended to the village a comprehensive plan which was reviewed by the village and adopted in 2012. The local waterfront revitalization strategy was completed in 2011. The LWRS does not require adoption by the municipality, so it was completed and handed over to the municipality. The local waterfront revitalization program, which is the last step in getting to LWRP, that project completed the document in 2014. It is required that that document be reviewed and approved by the Department of State, New York State Department of State. New York State DOS did not approve it because, in their opinion, it lacked the zoning measures that were required to make the village code complete. And as a result of that, the village obtained a grant from NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority, in 2014 to address the 29 code topics that were identified that were needed to address the zoning items. And the village at that time formed the Code Update Committee. And I see in the audience we have some of the original members of the Code Update Committee. Thank you all for being here tonight. And I apologize. Paul Henderson is one of the members of the Code Update Committee. Nora Hart has, Paul is doing the slides. Nora Hart was also on the Code Update Committee, as well as Jack and Michael. So we have a good representation. And Donald, I'm so sorry, Donald. Donald was also on the Code Update Committee. Okay. So the purpose of the Code Update Committee was to review and recommend actions on the 29 topics defined by NYSERDA, which were separated into 5 different categories, and you'll see the categories in a moment. Thus far, 4 public meetings have been held on the topics in the categories of use, appearance, environment, and procedure. All of the materials from those 4 public meetings are available on the village website, so you can go to them at any time to see what the previous 4 public meetings recommended. Tonight's meeting is to obtain public input on Category 5. Category 5 contains 2 topics, clarity and consistency, and two more activities. An updated zoning map, which you will see tonight, and the dimensional requirements table. I think those are the 2 additional topics. Both the recommended zoning map is on, and the dimensional requirements table are on the village website in the Phase 5 folder. Tonight, we're hoping that you will provide some input on any of the topics at all. We will keep tonight's meeting open until October 30th, and you can send any comments that you have to by email to Trustee Early at coldspringny.gov, or in a letter to the Cold Spring Village Office, 85 Main Street, and just attention Code Update Committee. So, previous topics, I had mentioned there were 4 previous topics. The topic of use, the Phase 1 use covered the following 10 topics. And all the recommendations from Phase 1, as I mentioned, are on the village website in Phase 1, including the presentation and the feedback from the Phase 1 public meeting. The next topic that was evaluated was appearances. And there were 7 topics. Again, those were all evaluated, recommendations were made. Those are all on the village website under Phase 2 of the Code Update Committee. Phase 3, environment. There were 5 topics there. There was a meeting held on those 5 topics, and the recommendations from those 5 topics are again all on the village website. The 4th category is procedures. There were 5 topics under procedures. Those are all on the village website. And the last category, which is why we're here tonight, is to amend the topics are amend the village code for consistency and clarity, and revise the zoning map to include new zoning districts and revised boundaries, and we'll go over that, revised boundaries for existing zoning districts based on the recommendation of the village's existing comprehensive plan and local waterfront revitalization program. In addition to the work that was done by the Code Update Committee, input was sought from the water and wastewater superintendent, the members of the Cold Spring Village Board, the chair of the planning board, the chair of the zoning board of appeals, and village council. So all of the recommendations are on the village website in 2 formats, as I mentioned, draft and draft with edits. You're more than welcome to look at them, peruse them, and send any comments, suggestions, criticism, whatever you have, to the Code Update Committee. And okay, now the village code has a number of chapters, and these are the chapters. In case any of you are familiar with them, some of them are my personal favorites. If we move to the next one. We haven't hit it yet. Shopping carts. There's there it is, shopping carts, chapter 101. There is a chapter on shopping carts. That's one of my favorites. And so the last chapter is the zoning chapter. It is the most extensive chapter, and that is where you will see the majority of changes, recommendations are being made. In going through now a bit of the work that was done in chapter 5, in going through the entire village code, it was apparent that some of the chapters haven't been modified or evaluated in quite some time. So if you read through the current village code, you will see that the chapters are not gender neutral at all. Many of the old chapters refer to he. The water superintendent, he. The building inspector, he. So obviously we wanted to make the chapters gender neutral. Second bullet, the code, current code identifies in it a number of fees that are being levied for different things. What we're doing here as part of our recommendation is moving the fees, the specific fees, out of the village code and into the master fee schedule. That will allow the village board to update the fees by resolution as opposed to having to go through a public hearing to change the village code. There were changes that were made, corrections to grammar, spelling, punctuation, and formatting. There were some references in there are some references in the code which are incorrect. Those have been addressed. And what the recommendation is that references to either the building inspector or the code enforcement officer be changed to reference building inspector / code enforcement officer, depending upon who is currently functioning in those positions. So, here are the chapters where we are making no recommendations for change. We see no problem at all with those chapters. So we're not going to make any change recommendations. In addition, there are some future changes that will be required. Chapter 1 of the Village Code contains the chapter name, the subsection name, the subsection number. As we go through this process of the public meeting tonight, your recommendations to us, the incorporation of those into the village code, the review by the village board, the movement to a public hearing by the village board, a seeker, and then an eventual adoption of the changes to the village code. There will be changes to numbers of sections, section names, etc. So chapter 1 will be updated once everything settles down. It's premature to update chapter 1 at this point. What you will see on the village website in the draft version and the draft version with edits is that page numbers have not been changed. The page numbers and the references in the page numbers remain as they are. As it turns out, the formatting of the village code is very unusual. The village code contains in the header of each page the chapter number and the subsection number that are on that page. As text is added or text is removed, those two elements in the header will change. Again, where we are right now, it would be premature to go through and redo all of that now because it will likely require changes again. And let me tell you that it is one of the most tedious tasks and most error-prone tasks I have ever been faced with. It's you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. It's awful, awful, awful. If you could go back one, Paul? Thank you. So, in addition, item number 3, every time there is a change to the village code, it is necessary to include in the change subsection the resolution number and the date that that change was made. Since we're nowhere close yet to a resolution from the village board, that last bullet, the inclusion of the local law, the number, and the date, that has not been addressed. That will be addressed once the chapters settle down and a resolution is drafted by the village board. Okay. So, now we get into some of the meat. This chart and the subsequent charts identify the recommended changes to each of the chapters. So, let me go to dumpsters and roll-off containers. There's a chapter on dumpsters and roll-off containers. That chapter has been modified to refer to the building inspector / code enforcement officer. The requirement for it references a requirement for a dumpster permit. There are some grammar changes, and the fees are recommended to be moved from that chapter to the master fee schedule. And lastly, the permit time length, the duration of the permit in the current village code is inconsistent with the permit itself. So we're recommending a change to make the two of them consistent. That's just an example of the kinds of changes that you will see in various chapters. Chapter 52 is floodplain management. There are major changes to floodplain management based upon that topic from NYSERDA of evaluate flooding standards. So you will see major changes there. Let's see, where else? Chapter 81, this is a new chapter. The NYSERDA recommended standards for outdoor lighting standards. And so this new chapter, 81, talks about lighting in various districts, what is permitted and what is not permitted. There is a chapter on recycling. This is just as an aside. The chapter on recycling was modified to include the new types of plastic which are acceptable for recycling. Currently, the village code only talks about 3 different categories, 1, 2, and 3, and recycling now accepts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that chapter has been updated to better describe, or more accurately describe, what is acceptable for recycling. In addition, as you are probably aware, the cost of recycling has gone up significantly to the point where the village pays essentially the same amount per ton to get rid of its garbage as it does to take its materials to recycling centers. So there's absolutely no economic advantage to recycling versus garbage. What we've been finding is that the recycling centers are rejecting some of our recyclable materials because the materials themselves are not clean. This recycling center requires that everything be washed. So this chapter has been updated to identify the requirement to have clean recyclables. Let's see, what else? Oh, we did modify shopping carts, my favorite chapter. Chapter 104, signs and placards, there were major changes to that chapter based upon the sign standards identified by NYSERDA. So that's something you may want to take a look at. Steep slopes, chapter 106. This is a new chapter, and it identifies what can and cannot be done for construction on property that has a steep slope. A steep slope is identified in terms of what the gradient is, and it talks about what can be done to mitigate steep slopes. So that chapter may be of interest to you. Let's see, what else? Vehicles and traffic. This one is a fairly substantial chapter, and what you will see is as the village changes, as new stop signs are installed, they need to be added to the village code. So we went through and made some changes there to update the village code to match what is actually in the village. And let's see. Oh, taxation. The village no longer does its own assessments. That responsibility was moved to the town. But the village does have a taxation chapter which identifies an upper limit of how much a person can have as income and claim an exemption from their village taxes. In looking at that amount of money, it seemed as if that amount of money was not appropriate for today's environment. So the limit has been lifted up. I think that will be good news for some folks. And the calculation to determine whether or not a couple or an individual qualifies for exemption in terms of what their income is, that has been substantially rewritten. It was very convoluted language that talks about what property was obtained and when it was obtained and whose name it was in. And so that has just been stricken from the record, and it's just a limit now. Also, the language referred only to a husband and wife. It did not refer to a couple. And so that has been changed so that it refers to a husband and wife and or a married couple, recognizing New York State laws. Okay. Let's see. The big one, chapter 134, the zoning. If you could sign in, thank you so much. The majority of the topics from previous chapters affect the zoning chapter. And as I said, that's a very large chapter. So this identifies at a very high level what the changes were made to chapter 134 to address the topics from the various earlier phases of the Code Update Committee. Also online you will find chapter 134, zoning table of dimensional requirements, and chapter 134, zoning map. I am not that good with getting, not photos, but PDFs and spreadsheets into a Word document. So what you will see is that these two topics are separate topics within the folder that's online representing the Phase 5 changes for the Code Update Committee. Okay. Now, what happens next? We're here tonight, and we're here to hear what you have to say about the Code Update Committee, or any of the topics in the Code Update Committee, or any other topics that you think that the village should consider. So we're here to listen to you tonight. Once your input tonight is understood and any other written comments are received while our meeting tonight is still held open, once those are all incorporated into the recommendations, the Code Update Committee will propose to the village board to accept the recommended changes to the village code. The next step would be for the village board of trustees to submit a resolution. My expectation is the village board of trustees is going to look at everything that's being recommended and put their twist on things. I doubt very much that what is recommended to them is what will come out of them. They will make some changes. Once they've decided what changes they want to make, they will submit a resolution, a formal resolution, to hold a public meeting, a public hearing. Part of that is to issue a notice to Putnam County Planning Department for them to review. That is required by municipal general law. They will also be required to provide notice to adjacent communities, and those are Nelsonville, Phillipstown, and the town of Highland, across the river. The village board of trustees would conduct a public hearing to consider responses, and a SEQR, State Environment Quality Review Act, will need to be documented, and we're hoping that it will come out with a negative declaration. And then the village board of trustees would adopt the revised village code amendments. So that's the set of sequence of events. How long will it take? My estimate is maybe it will all be done by March of next year, maybe. And that, by the way, that then just gets us to an approved update to the village code. Remember, we're doing all of this to get an approved local waterfront revitalization program. So that will be the next step, is to revive the LWRP, and that will be a significant piece of work. Remember that the LWRS was approved in 2011, the LWRP was drafted then, so it refers to Butterfield as the Butterfield site. There was no B4A. There are a number of things in the village that have changed that will require updating in the LWRP. Once all of that is done, then the LWRP goes back to the village board for acceptance or approval, Mike, which is approval?
I think it's recommended to the state.
And then it has to go on to the Department of State.
Right.
Okay. Could you go to the next one, and then we'll come back to questions and comments. So this is an eye chart that represents the changes that are being proposed to the village zoning map. And what you will see here are some new zones. Let's see, well, the green zone, is it the green zone? The green zone is, anything in green is recommended to be considered the district of Parks and Recreation, not to be confused with a television show. Right, this is, if you look at the properties that are identified, this is Scenic Hudson, this is the Chapel Restoration and the Foundry Dock Park, the Boat Club, the Waterfront Park, Dockside, the Haldane Field to the west of Route 90. Those are all being recommended to be rezoned as Parks and Recreation. What these were before is, this was primarily I-1 and I-2. I-1 was light industry, I-2 was heavy industry. And if we look at what they are doing today, they are really all parks. There are some changes being recommended to the properties in here, along here. Those properties currently are shown as partially I-1, I-2, and partially residential. So we're recommending these properties off of Chestnut Street. Chestnut Street comes below Chestnut Ridge. We're recommending that those be changed to Parks and Recreation, that's the Putnam History Museum, and R1 residences. The yellow is what we refer to as Marathon. That had been I-1, light industry. We're recommending that be changed to MU1, which is a new district, mixed use 1. That continues on with the upper portion, the upper left portion. That is the Village Garage site, the wastewater treatment plant, Mayor's Park. We're recommending that be mixed use 1. What was interesting about this I-1 is it continued into Rock Street. The only thing I can think of is that if you look at the current zoning map, it's a straight line. So someone must have just drawn the straight line from Marathon through into Rock Street. We're recommending that those be changed to those properties along Rock Street be changed from I-1. They're currently a mix of R1, I-1, R1 residential single family, I-1 light industry. We're recommending that they be changed to either R1 single family, or I think there's an R3.
R3.
Thank you. There are other changes in here. These two properties there, are currently B2 and B1. They are both single-family residences, and so we're recommending that those be converted back to R1. And these properties in here were, they were
Sorry, which one?
Yanatelli's, we're recommending those go to B2.
Those are B2, yeah.
I think that's a summary of the changes that we're recommending to the zoning map. We are missing one change. There was a sale of a piece of property as part of Scenic Hudson sold it. And we didn't have the coordinates, so we weren't able to accurately reflect the outline of the properties here. Am I in the right spot? Yes. Right. That should become, we have in there, this should be PR1.
The part that belongs to Scenic Hudson.
The part that should, the part that it belongs to Scenic Hudson should be shown as PR1. The piece of property that was sold by Scenic Hudson is correctly shown as R3. That has always been R3. There's one other, we're not sure about this one. There's a small piece of there's a piece of property here that's owned by Midtown Trackages. It's Metro North. And we are, in the current map, I forget how it's
We show it
shown.
as PR1,
We're showing it as
but it
PR1.
has a Metro North Railroad overlay.
Yeah. So those are two corrections that will need to be made. We used to have someone that we could go to for changes to maps, and that person is no longer available to us, so we're going to have to work through it ourselves. Okay, so now we're at questions and comments. Anyone? Michael?
How are the village-owned properties categorized? There are several village-owned
Yes.
properties, dump sites, and
Did you
you
back up?
touched on a few of those, but there are several others in the same map.
The riverfront is all PR1.
Murray, could you talk louder, please?
Of course, I'm sorry. The riverfront is all PR1. There are actually multiple parcels of property there. So the riverfront and the boat club are all being recommended to be PR1. The village garage, the wastewater treatment plant, Mayor's Park are all being recommended to be PR1. The village does not own Dockside, but that is being recommended to be PR1. There is,
But the village doesn't own Dockside.
pardon me?
The village doesn't own Dockside?
No,
I thought it did.
New York State. New
Oh,
York
I
State.
thought it came back to the
No.
village.
There is one piece of property, two pieces of property. There's one piece of property off of West Belvedere that goes from West Belvedere to the old Little League field. It's maybe 15 feet wide. I believe we left that as R1.
Yes.
There's another piece of property, so I talked about the boat club. The village owns up to Market Street. That is, and that right now is the pumping station. That is being left as PR1. There's another piece of property. Mike, you must have had some.
Benedict Road, the one at the end of Benedict Road, that one stays R1.
Yes. There's a piece of property that goes between Benedict Road and Kemble Avenue. That's staying R1. I couldn't bring myself to call it
What are the
PR1.
uses of PR1? Could you identify the uses of PR1?
Yes, recreation, obviously, functions that are ancillary to recreation, such as restrooms, possibly some sort of food preparation and sales. You got me, if you wait around afterwards, I can go, Paul, do you have it?
I'm looking.
There was one other objective I should point out in the recommendations. In the old zoning map, you will see parcels that have two districts going through them. And our objective here was to make sure that each parcel was in one and only one district. And so that resulted in some cases, a change in the zoning. In other cases, it was going from R1/I1 to just R1. Yes,
I would like to know how, the 35 years that I've worked in hazardous materials, the utilities, everything else, and I just retired, how does the sewer treatment plant, even though it's owned by the village, become a PR1? When you have hazardous materials and everything else stored there, along with everything else.
It's not a PR1.
Huh?
It's not in the PR1, it's in the MU1, and proposed MU1.
Well, it was just told that that whole thing was all,
It's yellow.
Yeah, no, this is the only green portion up here. This is one lot, so we can't really divide it right now, but this is where the sewage treatment plant is, and that's gonna be in the MU1 district.
Mixed use.
all right, so if they said everything,
I missed.
I didn't know, Marie probably misspoke, but it's all right now that I got a clear understanding, because it was the wastewater treatment plant and the park and everything going that way. I'm sorry, Marie.
No, I misspoke.
No, it's okay, don't worry about it. I still love you.
Is there a copy of this map? It's very difficult to see the key.
This was
Is
done
there a
on,
copy somewhere here that we can all
it
look
was,
at?
it was done on purpose, Betty. I have a copy online, which I'd be glad to show you. It's also online on the village website.
Yeah, if you wanna look at mine, you can.
The key,
I'll look at
sorry,
mine.
white, if it's white, if it has no coloring, it's R1. If it is this sort of teal, that's R3. If it is green, it's PR1. If it is that color, it's B4. If it is that color, it's B4A. If it's orange, it's B1. B1 is defined as Main Street businesses and all properties to the west of the railroad tracks. That is currently zoned B1. B2 is the strip, let me call it the strip mall. It's not a strip mall, but it's Dunkin' Donuts, Great Printing, Food Town, Yanatelli's, the veterinarian, and Drug World. And these four properties here, the two on the top are Yanatelli's and Drug World, and the two behind them are Dr. Peralia's office and Yanatelli's Garden Apartments. Those are currently zoned, we're recommending that they be zoned B2. So orange, that orange is B1, this orange is B2. Across the street from it, in the very light yellow, is B3. And that's M&T Bank and the Nest. So just right across there. What other colors do we have?
course, the one that's just this white is R1. That's the one that's not colored at all. So I did find the reference to PR1. I don't know, yeah, it's a fair amount. I don't know how much you want me to read, but I say that I found PR1 in the description that's fairly long, so I just read the first part of it.
Give me the page number.
13442.
Chapter 134.
And on the version I have.
Thank you.
Could you just clarify for me, please, the difference between an R1 and an R3?
The R1 is, R1 is, the color is white, and it's single family.
And it's single family.
Right.
And R3 is multifamily.
Yes.
Thank you. And what color is that?
It's a lovely shade of teal. Teal. So it's primarily Springbrook, Forge Gate, Scenic Hudson, but
Campbell.
this has to be corrected. There'll be only one portion here, which is the portion that Scenic Hudson sold, which remains R3, and then that little portion there along the boulevard, which was zoned R3, except for the single-family house that's located here, right in the middle, and for your old-timers, that's Mary Hickey's house.
You're talking about the Campbell Estate, when you say see a section of the old Campbell Estate is what you're talking about, that they allowed a certain section for R3?
The Campbell Estate was originally zoned R3, the entire portion.
Okay.
Scenic Hudson bought it, and then they sold a portion of it to a couple that, and there were all sorts, I think there were all sorts of covenants about the sale. Judith, is that correct? Judith, the sale of the Campbell Estate,
Yeah.
there were all sorts of restrictions.
On that little piece?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
But remains R3.
So it remains R3, but the covenants were saying that basically you couldn't develop it as multifamily,
Yes, that is correct.
which is why you're not changing it to R1.
Yes.
They put a conservation easement on it also.
There were a number of restrictions on the use of the land, what could be developed. I was not involved in that.
Yeah, but why not change it to R1?
If that is something that you think. would
Because that's
be
what they're
reasonable.
building now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It is
That was a deal, they can't build anything more but just
Yeah.
for one house.
Okay. So a good suggestion. Did you capture that one, Michael?
I'm sure they're not gonna complain because I can't do it
Right.
anyway.
So the Campbell Estate, which was sold, and it's Dr. somebody and Dr. somebody. The recommendation is that it be rezoned to R1. Makes sense? Sorry, Michael.
How does the B3 district, which is M&T and the Nest, differ from the B2 district? I guess that would be the Foodtown area in terms of the restrictions. How are those similar or different? I'm just curious.
Yes, the major difference between them is one is on the east side of Route 90 and the other is on the west side of Route 90. We are recommending that the zoning for R3 be changed. It currently, I think, requires a 60-foot front yard setback for R3. So we're making a recommendation,
For
I think.
B3?
Sorry, thank you, B3. The recommendation is that it be changed to 10 feet or 20 feet, something like that, so that it could potentially be developed into something different. So Paul has a dimensional table here. The front yard for B2 and front yard for B3.
They were both gonna be changed to 10.
Okay, so we're making them more consistent.
I was wondering how they were different, because they're two distinct.
Yeah, so current,
Both B2 is there.
currently B2 is 10, and B3 is 60.
But they're being changed to be, both being changed to 10.
Yes,
Are there then both the same, or are there other differences
I believe
in
there,
use of?
I believe there are some other differences, I'd have to go back. I think it's not just dimensional, I think there may be some, use differences between the two.
Okay.
The only difference in the other difference in the dimensional table is the lot coverage, so B2 is 30% and B3 is 35%. That's the only other difference in them in the dimensional table.
Okay.
But there is a different description for them in the
Okay.
text.
I was just wondering if the differences are material, so 30 versus 35% doesn't strike me as being material. You may want to consider making it a single name if they're
Okay,
only off by a shade.
good suggestion, so, consider combining B2 and B3. Now, okay, we'd have to look at that. Because there's more to B2 than just the food town. It extends into Yanatelli's area, so we'll have to take a look at that.
The Montessori school was a commercial use, and then it was converted, a portion was converted to residential use. Is there any change in the zoning designation or naming of that?
It's still R1.
It's still R1, okay.
The
that
old,
would
the
change.
old,
Okay.
as it turns out, the old, zoning map and the new zoning map, the old zoning map did not show B4A. So the new zoning map does show B4A, including the 3 R1 properties that were part of B4A that are now R1 adjacent to Clawden. Okay, that is shown in the old zoning map as just one parcel. So that change, it reflects village law. B4A was adopted, and the 3 residential parcels were also part of that law. Yes,
If there is a home that has like an outbuilding that's being rented or something, is that R3 or R1 or?
if it's in an R1 district, sorry, let me back up. The recommendations address accessory buildings and accessory uses. And that was, I'm gonna say, part of phase 1 use. And we're recommending changes to what is permitted or not permitted for the ancillary structure on a lot, on a parcel of property. We're also recommending changes for how close a garage can be to a property line. Because right now, you'll see many garages which are right on the property line. So we're making recommendations for that. We're also making recommendations for accessory apartments in a residence. And you'll see recommendations for that, including the minimum number of square feet, the obviousness of the entrance to the accessory apartment or not. All part of an R1 district.
Okay.
So look, I would recommend you look at chapter 134, look for accessory uses, accessory buildings, and accessory apartments. Those are 3 topics that were addressed in the use category.
But generally, if a home is in an R1 area on the map, you're not plucking out individual buildings to make them R3?
No,
Okay. Okay.
No, there's, to the best of my knowledge, and Paul, correct me on this, we didn't change anything that was an R1 and made it an R3.
Correct. I don't think we changed any, we added a couple of properties to R1, but we didn't take any away.
Okay.
Could you clarify for me, Marie? I know of a number of properties in Church Street, Garden Street, et cetera, that actually have apartments. Yeah? Well, for instance, the Budney residence, or the former Budney residence, my own, other people have very long-standing examples of multifamily in an R1. Any impact?
No, we are not recommending that the property, that the lot be rezoned from R1. All of Church Street is R1, and there are.
So there's no consequence for having
Well,
apartment
we're
buildings?
gonna get the code enforcement officer after you, Phil, that's for sure.
I'm grandfathered, I'm sure.
You're old, yes.
That was one word we took out of the code.
Good.
No,
Just
but
kidding.
I'm serious. I mean, this is a situation that has existed in the village for, I don't know, decades.
Yes.
And so, how is that being addressed at all in this?
If someone has a building that had 3 apartments in it,
Mhm.
and they now have 4 apartments in it, in that single building, that would be, in my opinion, and they did not go for a zoning change or a change of use, it seemed to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be a violation of the code.
They'd have to come for a change
That,
of use.
yeah, that's an expansion of a non-conforming use, which isn't permitted.
So the term would be a 50-year-old non-conforming use?
Well, let me take a building that was.
I mean, I don't want to talk about my particular.
No.
Let's talk about you, Phil.
Yeah, please, don't make it about me.
It's all about Phil.
Let's talk about the Budneys.
No, I'm gonna talk about a building that exists on Church Street that happens to have 3 floors in it, and each floor is rented
Or
out.
4 floors.
Each floor is rented out as a rental unit, and that's been the case for years and years and years. And someone then takes the basement floor in that 3-family building and turns it into another apartment. That would be a violation of the current zoning.
Well, that would
code.
be your opinion, but is it the zoning changes, is it going to be incorporated going forward as zoning?
That wouldn't change the zoning, they'd have to come for a change of use.
Well, if this alleged basement apartment was always part of the dwelling of the owner of the building, then it may or may not be a change of use if it was primarily used as storage beforehand, right?
But it's now a living space, so it is. a
Oh,
change
okay,
of
so-
use.
Which have different,
So how about other properties, though? There are a number of places that have apartments in R1 areas. Do they all have to now go and get permission to continue doing what they've been doing?
No, but new changes or change of use would require a current, sorry, let's say there's a 3-floor building and the owner of the 3-story building is proposing to change the basement into another rental unit. That, by today's code,
Right.
that would require permission to do that.
So is it being addressed in this code?
No,
No, so no
it's
change.
already addressed.
So, okay, all right, so basically, any change to something that's been done for 50 years would require a change of use? And and that would go before the planning board or the zoning
yeah,
board?
the planning board.
Okay.
Like if you wanted to turn your apartment into a store, you'd have to come talk to the planning board.
Well, no, I'm not suggesting a store, because that seems like that's prohibited, because it would create signage and traffic and all that sort of thing, but
And I
as
wasn't-
a use that building has been used for, namely housing, that requires a change
The
of use.
building across at One Depot Square, across from the restaurant,
Mhm.
that they wanted to change it from 3 apartments to 6 or 4 or 5, I forget.
Right.
And they came to the planning board as appropriate to
Yeah.
talk about it.
How'd that turn out, by the way?
You can read the minutes.
How does a building go from being non-conforming legal to being illegal? That is, what would be necessary for someone to lose I'll say the value of the non-conforming status, the grandfathering status? For example, would discontinuance of a use for a period constitute abandonment of
Yes.
that
Yeah.
claim?
Yes.
And if so, what is the period?
I think
Is that,
it's either 2 years or 5 years. I can't remember.
would the sale of the property
No,
constitute
the sale of the property
abandonment?
does not. Is that a recommendation, Mike?
No, it's not a recommendation, but it just should be spelled out to be, I think, just broadly, if there is an objective to make properties conform to the code, there should be careful study of what it would take to force properties to be in conformance. But it's a delicate issue because you don't want to twist people's arms and cost them, or reduce the value of the property that they're selling. It's a delicate issue, but it should be spelled out in the code and discussed exactly what that step is. The classic case is the gravel yard in
Yes.
Garrison. It's an absolutely classic case where the rules were far too lax in the code revise that the town did in 2011. They should have been much stricter, which would have been more consistent with what the other counties do in this area, or the towns do in the area. But we should look at that very closely to make sure that it's just the right balance.
We did, there is a section, it's in it's chapter 134. Is it 16, 17, 18, or 19? I can't remember what it is. Non-conforming uses, and we changed that to non-conforming building, non-conforming uses, and non-conforming lots. And we tried to tighten things up, but did not incorporate sale of the property as one of the conditions. That takes something from non-conforming to illegal.
And I'll just add one other item which is more personal. My wife and I live in a 3-story house. It's not 2.5 stories, it's a true 3-story house. If that house were to burn to the ground, we would not be able to rebuild it under the proposed zoning or under the current zoning. And I think that given that it's an historic building, it was built in 1865, you may want to review that and say that, at least in certain circumstances, you can rebuild that house. So in this case, you're saying that you fall out of, it's a non-conforming legal, and you fall into an illegal if you were to try to reconstruct the house as it was.
If you don't get it there.
Yeah, you would
Yeah,
probably get a
but
variance.
I think it should be by right. I mean,
But
I
then we
think,
have to-
because then we're trusting that we're, I think that the
But
code.
nothing's by right, you have to go through the historic board, they
Well-
would support rebuilding it the way it was, and the planning board would go
Well-
along probably.
Well, the current board might, but I think the law should, if there is something that is outlandish in the code, I would put in an exception to make sure that people who are in that situation are protected.
Maybe a 2-year limit period,
Jeff?
like
I
2
think the
years.
thrust of zoning is the fair treatment of everybody equally within
Yeah.
the zone. That's the thrust of legal zoning. And to propose a system where there are individual exceptions made regardless of whether they are morally compelling or not is probably not a good direction in which to go. So, because it opens up the entire system to a challenge of spot zoning or conflict of interest. So I think what you want to do is create your zoning districts rationally, which means that they conform to a common appearance and use majority. And you want the rules to apply to everybody equally, and then set up a system where you can receive a variance from those rules. But rezoning in order to accommodate individual properties, I think, is not a supportable principle to inculcate into your code.
I would agree, rezoning should not be, there shouldn't be spot zoning, but what I'm pointing to though is the way that a non-conforming property becomes illegal. And I would suggest that if a non-conforming property is destroyed, the reconstruction of that, where it's a historic property, should not be cause for making it illegal.
Well, I
It's
understand,
simply
and
not
I didn't mean to have it,
Right.
an
Right,
argument with
right,
you
right,
here,
right.
because I don't think it's the right place.
Right,
But,
sure.
one of the second principles involved is, well, never mind, I won't, I'll answer a question, because I had misheard or not. Did you say that all of the properties west of the railroad tracks on Main Street had been changed from R1 to B1?
No,
Okay.
all of the properties to the west of the railroad track are currently zoned B1.
They are currently zoned.
We're
With the
making,
exception of the gazebo property, which is actually its own category, which we don't actually have as a park. It's shown as a
Yeah,
green space.
within the bandstand.
Yeah.
yes. Whoa, he got you.
But,
I've
so they're currently zone B1,
Yes.
everything is?
Yes.
Okay, and just to follow up, is there an overlay anywhere of what's been changed?
I have a list, if you think that would be helpful.
I didn't.
I can go through, but the list is by tax map ID.
You have to go through and find each one. It's pretty easy if you just hold the two next to each other to compare them. You'll because the colors have slightly changed too, it's much easier.
Okay,
to
so
see them.
online, there are the two,
Yes.
the existing and
Um,
the proposed?
Yeah.
Sorry, online, the current zoning map is found in, online in the villages. You go to the village code, go to chapter 134, and it's about page 80-something.
But this is the
Okay,
the
then my
village
suggestion
website.
would
This
be
map
that you.
is on the
This is-
website.
this-
That's
this
where
is
it's
on the
live
web-
right
this one
now.
is on the
So I'm
website.
looking at this on the website.
Okay,
Can I just make
I'm saying my
a clarifying
suggestion
point
would be that you
just so
cut
we're
them.
all clear that, like, nothing has been changed. I mean, this is all, proposed and before anything can be changed. I mean, I'm sure Marie went over this at the beginning, but it's just really important to keep reinforcing, I think, that is, sometimes our language gets
Imprecise.
imprecise, and nothing as a result of this committee's work, which I'm Michael Reisman, sorry.
I apologize, Michael.
Uh,
Michael had to work late in the city and is just running this now.
So this is a process, this is a step in the process, then, the next step eventually is for the village board to take this up, and there'll be notice and hearing and all that, and, but it's just to say, I think it's good to have this discussion.
No, I understand that, and it was really clearly laid out for us at the beginning of the meeting about what those subsequent steps are. So I just for the sake of ease, if you could do a slide somehow and put them side by side, I think it would be helpful. Thank you.
Michael, could you make note to produce a list of, I can do tax map IDs and street numbers, on street names. That would be a step. Putting them side by side, they would be so small.
The one after the other, all I'm saying is so that you don't.
Okay. And so the second thing is to put the current zoning map in the category, phase 5, online, chapter 134. And I'll figure out how to name it so people can see it.
I have a very basic question. What is the revitalization strategy? What is the synoptic view going forward into the future?
So the comprehensive plan is essentially goals. The local waterfront revitalization strategy puts meat on those goals and talks about specifics within the village. So it talks about dockside as a park that could be enjoyed for multiple people. It talks about the boat club and what the future of the boat club could be. It talks about, Mike, help me on this, some of the other, some of the
Marathon.
Marathon.
It talks about Marathon and what Marathon might become. So it's aspirational in nature. The LWRP takes it a step further and fills in, for example, what are the soil types that are found in the village of Cold Spring? What are the flora and fauna specifically that are in the village of Cold Spring? So the comprehensive plan says, here's what the village would like to become in the future. And there are 7 goals. And they are spelled out, and many of the goals are as a result of a survey that was done in 2007? No,
2007.
2007,
January.
which had, as surveys go, a very high rate of return and response. So one of the things that came through loud and clear, what's important to the village is that it continue to be walkable. A walkable village is very important to us. And so that was the goal. And so in the LWRS, what can be done to keep the village more walkable? So keeping neighborhoods more friendly, having front stoops, front porches, where people can greet their neighbors and walk through their neighborhoods. Being able to quickly get, not quickly, on foot now, but to get from Paulding Avenue to Foodtown. How can you quickly get from Paulding Avenue? Wouldn't it be nice if there were a path, a walking path that went through Butterfield to go from Paulding Avenue to Foodtown? So, and then, so each one has more detail associated with it. All 3 documents are available on the village website, so you can see how it went from one set of goals to aspirations and then specific recommendations in the LWRP. What we would like to see happen for each of the goals that were identified.
And I would add to that only that the significance of adopting that officially is that it prevents both state and federal government to come in and say, widen a road. Right now, the village has no protection against something like that. That's what that does.
Right.
That means that we're in control of the future and to a higher degree.
Good night, good
I
night.
can't hear you back here.
Sure, I was saying that the real goal of that is that once it's adopted, it means that the village can protect itself from both state and federal agencies coming in and making changes. Right now, without that adopted, we don't have the ability to prevent that.
In addition, having an approved LWRP makes applications for grants much more attractive. Typically, the awarder of a grant will give more points to a municipality which has an adopted LWRP. So many of these grants are point-based, so you want to get as many points as you can to qualify for the grant. Sorry, Dave?
Getting back to what your committee does, are you looking into any specific zoning permitted uses? Are you getting into that?
We did go through that. We did make some changes to it. I would say that in general, there were not a lot of changes. Having said that, I-1 goes away, I-2 goes away. But we still have R1, R3, B1, B2, and B3.
So being in the R1 district, I'm kind of concerned about permitted uses in that district.
Yes.
So you're looking at that, or?
Yes, yes, we did, and we tried to make it more conforming to what were stated as goals in the LWRS, such as one of the goals in the LWRS was to create more the ability to have more families in the village as full-time residents. The ability for people who have older homes where they may have the need for additional income to carve out a portion of their home and create an accessory apartment. So yes, we looked at that and did modify the R1 permitted uses to do that.
So my concern is obviously short-term rentals in the R1 district.
Yes,
And
and
that's disruptive to neighborhoods and neighbors.
so relative to short-term rental, the current code talks about tourist homes, boarding houses, and rooming houses. And the current code says that those are permitted in an R1 district, those are permitted in an R1 district. And then in section 16 or 17, it says, in an R1 district, you must be located on a state road, which is 301 to the red light and 90. So what we did was we said, what makes sense? One of the recommendations that came out of the questionnaire in 2007 was that there are very little places for people to have their families stay overnight. They would like to have more ability for their families to stay over for a wedding or for a funeral at a reasonable cost.
So when you say families, you're talking about relatives of the owner of the house,
Yes, or, old friends.
as opposed to short-term rentals like Airbnb.
So we've changed the wording from tourist homes, boarding houses, and I can't remember what, to overnight accommodation. So that's the phrase you want to look for, overnight accommodation. That equates to short-term rentals. And what we're recommending in this package is that short-term rentals in an R1 district, that they have to have a fire inspection, they must have proof of insurance, and they must have off-street parking.
See, this is what kind of concerns me. All of a sudden, we're going forward saying that these are gonna be legal, and that currently are not illegal. So you're talking already about regulating something that's illegal,
Well,
basically.
so today, tomorrow morning, if you were to go down to the village office and say, I want to apply for a permit to put a tourist home in my house, you would be handed a form to fill out, which would then occasion a request for a special use permit and a change of use. So it would go to the planning board, and it would go to the ZBA, and they would evaluate it, and if you did not live on one of the highways in the village, you would ask for a variance, and they would consider that and grant it to you.
So essentially, B1 zoning really doesn't mean anything.
B1 is on
R1.
R1
Means
zoning
nothing.
doesn't really mean anything.
So it says that you can have a rooming house in an R1 district.
On a certain street, it said.
On a
Sorry?
It
business.
says on the street, on the 30, or
Sorry.
State road.
301 and Main
it's
Street.
not on Garden Street or not on Kimball
State
Avenue.
road.
Sorry, you can ask for a variance to get that approved. So you can do it today.
So you make it sound like it's just really nothing to get that. So where's the protection for me
Right.
in an R1 district?
So,
That, R1 district, you get certain protections,
Yes.
property values, the whole deal.
yes.
And then if you can just take them away like that, it doesn't mean anything.
So last night at the village board meeting, we did have a discussion on short-term rentals. And I don't have I think I may have my notes with me. And what was stated is that right now, bear with me, let me find my notes. Right now, the village, right now, one of the problems that we have is enforcement for short-term rentals. And Dave Morandi said that originally we used to have our own building inspector. And then the village worked an agreement, an intermunicipal agreement with the town, and the town took over code enforcement for the village. The village now would like to look at hiring our own code enforcement officer to work at the direction of the village.
To do what? To actually close down these illegal enterprises or
So-
regulate them where see, that's where I'm having a sticking point.
So-
I want to regulate something that's illegal.
Right, so I'll give you I'll take you through it logically. First thing we need to do is have enforcement in the village. Second thing that we need to do is hire a fire inspector. And to that end, the first one, we're looking at resumes. We have to go through Clinton County's database, and we're looking at that to find a code. I know, it takes a while. A code
No,
of
I just
Yeah, but
think
just to
you're
the point,
missing my
we
point.
don't need that point. The point is, you're telling us that if I come, I live on Constitution Drive, I wanna go for a variance, suppose they give me the variance for a B and B. He lives up there, they don't give him, how you gonna regulate, how you gonna say which person is gonna get it, which is not?
If you'll let me get through the 4 points. Okay, so
You're
enforcement is.
beating around the bush.
Yes. Just let me get.
Okay, well, I'd like to interrupt this.
Fire inspection is next.
Please do.
We need to find, hire a fire inspection. The village board has listened to significant feedback from a number of different points of view, and the village board will, so the village board needs to deliberate on that. The 4th point is, we're not going to bring the hammer down now. We're going to ease into it. We're going to come up, this is the village board, we're going to come up with a series of regulations that will monitor with our code enforcement officer, with our fire inspector, monitor the situations and take action.
Monitor what? To monitor the conditions in an illegal Airbnb, or monitor that they're there in the first place, and they shouldn't be. They should be closed down. That's what the building inspector should be doing.
Okay, but what I'd like to say is that all of this that we're talking about is what's being proposed, and I don't want to just occupy the whole evening about talking about Airbnb, because it's obviously a hot topic. What I do want to make the point about though right now is that all of the work that we've done on the Code Update Committee is nothing compared to what Marie Early has done. And I really want to congratulate Marie for taking on this huge task, because it was really monumental. And when she was saying that, you know, you wouldn't wish this kind of consistency review on anyone, Marie is the one who did it. And that was a huge task. So I don't want to shut the discussion down by any means, but it's not the only topic we want to cover tonight. And I would like to.
I understand that,
Like
but
this.
to me, that's not.
Yeah.
Just to give you one point, okay?
Yeah.
Everybody, no matter what they do, puts time and effort in. It's called volunteerism,
Well,
okay?
some people do, yeah.
Some do.
Yeah.
And mostly do too. Just for an example, men that died on that wall that are gone,
Yeah.
the ambulance corps, your police department, all right? What I see here, being here over 51 years, and you got people in this room, most of them, that aren't even been here that long and couldn't find their way down to the public bathroom, okay? You're taking a nice little residential neighborhood in a nice little residential town, and everybody just wants to make a buck. And when they make their buck, I'm out of here. And that's what's going on. If I wanted to do something into my house, all right? And I stuck up for you too, so remember way back. If I want to do something in my house and I want my family to live there for a couple of days or do this and do that, you throw up a bed, you throw some cots if they come for the weekend. I don't buy this Airbnb crap. Pardon my language. I don't buy it. It's a joke. It's for somebody to make quick cash, and it's a lot of garbage. And then they rent them out. Oh, I'll go see my brother. And they got the whole run of the house. Who's policing it?
So,
I want to see strict fire and building codes. We had building inspectors, we had fire inspectors, and they got rid of them because they didn't want them anymore. Or, oh, we got to cut the budget, or we got to do this, or we got to do that. Ridiculous. Hats off to the people that did all this work, but you're not going to snowball me or anybody else.
so
We're not
the
trying to.
village board is going to either form a work group amongst themselves and/or work with citizens, residents of the village, to come up with a position on short-term rentals for the village. there will be additional
Good,
discussion.
I'm glad to hear that, just because my perception is that it's already been decided they're gonna be illegal. And it's just a question of how do we regulate them and who's gonna do it. And that's the
Right.
part
It
that,
sounds like.
There's been no
Yep.
decision made, one way
good,
or
all right, I'll take the word.
Um, Tom, your wife says I should,
You've already,
yes,
you've already
your wife
talked,
says I should.
you've already talked to her, you've talked to me. My big question, and Dave alluded to it earlier, is you can go online right now to VRBO,
Yes.
Airbnb, all of those websites, and Betty came up 45 minutes the other night, came up with 25 of them.
Yep.
My question is, they're illegal. Now you're talking about, we're gonna have a committee, and we're gonna have a conference, and we're gonna have to talk about them. The village turned over code enforcement and building inspection to the town. Why is has not the village board directed Greg to do the same thing? Go on Airbnb, find them, go to the address.
And I can tell you that there have been discussions with Greg, and they have not yielded the kind of results we would like to see yet. Therefore, the village board is looking at bringing the responsibility back into the village and hiring a code enforcement officer that we can direct and control. So we're on the same wavelength there. What are you next to, Debbie? Between the two Impel girls.
There I am, I'm the third one. But
I'm
anyway,
sorry, the two
that's
Impel
okay.
girls.
So, in our data driven society, have you collected any data that shows how many homes in the village are actually being used for that purpose? And if so,
For the purpose of, I'm sorry,
for
did you?
short-term rentals?
Uh-huh.
And if so, then doesn't that prove to you that there's an issue and a problem?
I'm sorry, the question is, have
you collected data
uh-huh.
that shows how many homes in the village are used as short-term
Yeah.
rentals?
And to answer to your question, I come up with a number that's maybe 25, maybe 30, maybe 50. I can't tell. There is no way to evaluate the total number of residences that are being used for short-term rentals in the village. I just can't
So
be
to
done.
your point, then the issue is really enforcement.
I'm sorry?
So to your point, the issue is enforcement, to find out if indeed these homes are being used for
Right
short-term
now,
rentals.
the only information that we have that we can work on is when a complaint is received. We don't have the code enforcement officer who has the cycles to do the enforcement that we would like to see done. So we're working on it. You don't hire someone overnight, you've got to interview, so we're working on it. And we're trying to get things done as quickly as possible.
Marie, I don't understand how you can say you don't have the wherewithal to identify these individual homes slash
That's right.
businesses.
We don't have the wherewithal to identify all the homes that are being used.
Well, what do you mean by that? You don't have the wherewithal? I don't understand what that statement is significant of. What do you actually mean you don't have the ability to?
Is that legally? You mean legally?
No, I can certainly look on the online marketing sites for short-term rentals. And in looking at some of them, I can identify what the property is. But those people that do not advertise on those marketing sites, I have no idea who they are.
Well, you can address the ones that you can identify.
Yes, I agree, I agree, but I can't do anything about it until I have a code enforcement officer and a fire inspector.
Have you written, is there actual correspondence requesting that the code
Yes.
enforcement
Yes.
officers? Okay.
And there have been face-to-face meetings.
Okay.
And we're taking a different direction now. Okay.
May I ask one question? You have a trustee that has an illegal B&B. How is he gonna be in these conversations with this stuff? Is he gonna be allowed to speak? Is he gonna be allowed to sit on this side of the board or that side of the board? When it comes for a decision, is he gonna be allowed to say something?
I believe, and I haven't gone to our attorney about that, but I believe he would have to recuse himself on any decision. I believe, but I'm not.
Kelly, I think I read that he made a statement himself that he would recuse himself.
But he's still sitting on the board at the hearings.
We haven't had,
Well, I mean,
we have
at the
not had
public-
any hearings.
When, all right, when at the
Had-
public meeting, he's still sitting on that
Yeah,
side of the
and
board.
listening, and listening. Yes.
not making any comments.
I believe that that is true. When we had the meeting here 1 to 2 weeks ago, I believe, I can't remember, it was last week. It wasn't last week, it was
No,
2
2
weeks.
weeks.
I don't believe that, I believe the only person that spoke was me.
So he's not allowed to say nothing, he won't be allowed to vote, he'll have to keep his mum for the whole time that all this goes on when it comes up again. That's my question.
What I said was, in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, he would have to recuse himself from any vote of the village board. That's my opinion.
But a conversation, I'm saying.
He can certainly listen, he can certainly ask questions, that's the nature of the village board.
But nature of the village board, he's one violating the law also. So how can he have an opinion as a trustee? How can he say yea or nay? That's what I'm saying.
Right, and as I said, when it comes to a vote, I think he has to recuse himself, and we would have to get the legal counsel's opinion on that.
Works for me.
Marie, if I can?
Yes.
I was gonna just do this as points and then do a letter.
Okay,
But since you brought up that this is only for residents, I do have an issue. I have an issue, just to say. So I just want to tell you just the points. My name's Pat O'Sullivan. I live in Garrison with my wife Margaret, and we've been there since 1970. My wife and I own a property on Main Street, 60-64 Main Street, since 1978. It used to be the old post office, if anybody who knows about it. It's 2 commercial storefronts and 4 residential. Margaret has worked locally for years, and I still do since 1982. Our year-round tenants have been commuters, Cold Spring shop owners, law enforcement, teachers, local employees. They have been involved in community as child caregivers, arts, legal, health professionals, and in politics. We possibly could make more money by doing short-term rentals, not the 3-hour rentals, but wish that our tenants would become part of the village. And they have done so over the years in the various village community functions. I personally don't know where the push for the code change is coming. This is in regard to the short-term rentals. But it seems to want to accommodate the already illegal short-term rentals. My suggestion to the boards, if there is to be a change, is to start from zero. Make the criteria for such ventures that all have to abide by, and then apply for a permit with all the regulations intact, i.e. zoning approval, building approval, fire control, and whatever other regulations are needed to be able to control the potential degradation of village life. Saying that, not the majority of short-term renters are a problem, but for the good of all the homeowners and users, it should be standardized. Also, consider a hotel/accommodation tax that benefits the village to assist with the upkeep and maintenance needed to keep the village a desirable place to live and/or visit. A compromise on the regs is not the solution to this new village problem. You need to envision that what you want the village to be, or has been, for the remaining springers that are here, and make the regs conform to that standard. Hopefully you decide to keep Cold Spring a viable village and not a pass-through place for the itinerant traveler. So this is Margaret and myself thought this, and I'll send it to the office also.
I would appreciate it, thank you, John.
Question, this section 5 is about consistency and clarity. When you look at consistency, are you just looking at the internal consistency within the village code of the various sections, or are you also looking at consistency with town, state, county law, or even federal law, to see if the changes that you're proposing conform to the other levels of government that we're dealing with? I mean, it even comes up with this issue of the Airbnb issue, because New York State was contemplating legislation 18 months ago on that, and then declined to make changes. But it could conceivably do that, make some changes in its legislation. So the question has to do with, is the consistency just internal to the village, or is it intended to be consistent with all of the various levels of government?
It is intended to be, the consistency is consistency within the code,
Okay,
consistency with the comprehensive plan, the LWRS, and the LWRP.
okay,
Where there are known state laws, we attempt to be consistent we have attempted to be consistent with them. Where there are known federal laws, for example, I was asked whether or not, there's a new chapter being proposed that has nothing to do with the Code Update Committee. It's on compensation for consultants, the escrow law. I was reviewing that the other day with one of the boards, and I was asked whether or not NEPA should be included in Chapter 57, the new compensation law, whether or not NEPA should be considered in there along with SECRET. So I looked up NEPA to find out what it was about, and I consulted with our attorney who said, no, NEPA is a federal regulation, and the feds, sorry, I don't mean to say, that may sound negative, I don't mean, the federal government implements NEPA. The municipalities will have no responsibility to implement NEPA. So where there was an intercept between the village, between the recommendations here, the other chapters of code, other comprehensive plan, LWRS, LWRP, other legislation within the village, any state legislation or federal legislation that we were aware of, we have attempted to be consistent. Might we have missed something? Sure, we might have.
the most obvious one is speed limits, because the state speed limits deviate from the village speed limits.
Yes.
And that would be the most, that would be the most salient issue that I would see in terms of the consistency with other.
And so what you will find in the chapter on speed limits is the chapter on speed limits says that the village speed limit is 30 miles an hour, which is what the state requires. There are 25-mile-an-hour speed limits that the state permits as long as they are in the school zone. So that has been changed in the village code. That is not popular change, but I have attempted to get a state to approve the village lowering the village speed limit, and there are two situations in the entire state of New York where the speed limit in a village is lower than 30 miles an hour. One's in Buffalo, and one is, I think, on Long Island, and they are both either adjacent to or within a public park. Those are the only two situations in the state of New York that have a lower than 30-mile-an-hour speed limit.
Just as a follow-up to that, what happens if the state changes the law on something and we are no longer aligned with that? Do we then change our code to follow, or?
If the state changes its laws, we do our best to be consistent with them. If it requires a change to the code, yes, that's what we would have to do. But that's independent of this work.
Sure,
Yeah.
and thank you for doing all this work. It's a big undertaking.
You know, one other example, which is near and dear to all of our hearts, is parking. You know, and residential parking permit systems. The village has one west of the tracks, but the village cannot, on its own accord, implement a residential parking permit system. It needs permission from the state legislature. And the state did that about 15, 20 years ago.
Well, they also approved a second residential parking permit system for east of the tracks, and we are still trying to work that through.
It's sitting on the governor. Well, it's, you know, the metaphorical desk of the governor. It's somewhere. It's been passed by the legislature. It just has not been signed by the governor.
One of the problems is that residential parking system that exists requires a certain amount of on-street parking that would permit every resident, 80% of the residents, there's a percentage. We can't meet it. The number of residential parking spaces, on-street parking spaces, has decreased as more people have put in more driveways as we have put in crosswalks, there are crosswalks, so it's just the residential parking spaces have gotten smaller and smaller. At the same time, if you had a house on Church Street that was 3 stories tall and you put an apartment in the basement, you now have 4, and I'm not talking about Phil. I really am not. If you put an apartment in the basement, you now have the requirement for 4 parking spaces on Church Street for one structure. So we've not found a way to do that yet. Yeah, we're looking at it. Donald?
I just want to say thank you to the entire board for all the grinding hard work that I know that you've been through.
Thank
And
you.
We all owe you a debt of gratitude.
And we owe you a debt of gratitude. We should pay you rental for your projector. Judy?
In the area of consistency, we all know that we've got an issue with drainage overwhelming our wastewater treatment, just rainwater coming down the hill.
Yeah.
And we went through that big project of everybody checking their drains, et cetera. One of the challenges of the planning board is the fact that you've got this very vague little paragraph that says that everybody is encouraged to do sustainable building. That would include permeable surfaces. I think it really needs to be spelled out strongly, giving us, the planning board, more ability to ask for that. And it kind of counters the other passage that says surfaces should be dust-free. Well, I have a gravel driveway. It was dusty at one point. It's not dusty now, but
Permeable surfaces recommendation. What we do have is a new chapter on steep slopes that attempts to address water
Yeah.
runoff when there is development on a steep slope. So
I'm thinking more like, for instance, when the endless skiing was
Yeah.
built. We actually suggested it and they said, oh, that's a great idea, great big parking lot, instead of having all that water go into the village wastewater, let's try to get some of it absorbed. So a lot of municipalities have rain gardens, they have swales, they have all sorts of ways that they encourage residents to collect water on their own properties.
Yes.
So just hope a little bit, just pulling some of that language together to make it a little
I may
stronger.
come back to you and ask for recommendations, but
You can call me anytime.
thank you, Judy. Aaron?
I think you might consider making the recycling chapter more flexible, the same way you did with fees. Because I think the village board would have a lot of, if you give the village board flexibility with trash and recycling, we could probably turn around the problem where recycling costs so much. And without going through the entire, the process of changing the code again. For example, if you were to say, okay, from now on, we're only taking bundled cardboard and bundled newsprint and glass separately, you would probably start making more money on recycling again. So I would suggest that you don't put that in the code, but you make some kind of schedule of recycling and trash instructions and fees.
So Fran is looking at potentially an alternating week of recycling, this week cardboard and newspaper, next week plastic, glass, etc.
That's fine. I'm just suggesting you don't hard code it in the code.
Don't specify it in the code, and that allows you more flexibility to change it.
Right. So maybe the every other week, I think that's a great idea. Or let's go back to sorting it, or let's only collect what they're actually going to pay us for. So
Well, that's a
figure out what works best, but don't hard code something that's going to be out of date by the time this gets passed.
That's his point, I
Yeah.
think. Don't lock us in.
Separate, sort of like the fee schedule, a separate recycle schedule. Yeah, I know.
But really, to have to change the code every time we change how we do recycling?
If you looked at the code right now, this is
Yeah.
what it says. You would say, yeah, we should change the code from what it says. Okay, so Michael's capturing that. Thank you. Other comments? Okay, well, I thank you all for joining us tonight. Some very good suggestions, and I thought some good exchange of ideas. Let's see how they all pan out. Thank you again.
Hey, thanks for all your work.
Well, I